Saturday, May 3, 1953, 2 p.m. Frank Costello sat in his penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, 39 floors above the streets of Manhattan, and signed a death warrant. Not literally. Mob bosses didn't put murder contracts in writing unless they were idiots. But the conversation with Anastasia was clear enough. Bumpy Johnson has become a problem, Costello said, his voice calm and measured as always. He was 62 years old, wore a $2,000 suit, had silver hair combed straight back, and spoke with the refined diction of a man who'd spent 30 years negotiating with politicians and judges. He controls too much of Harlem. He's too independent. He refuses to pay proper tribute. And now he's making deals with the Lucchese family without going through us. Anastasia sat across from him, a bull of a man with murder in his eyes. You want him gone? I want him neutralized, preferably dead, but I'll accept him broken and running if that's how it has to be. Dead is cleaner, Anastasia said. Dead sends a message. Then make it clean. Make it public enough that everyone knows it was us, but private enough that the police can't prove anything. And Albert, make it hurt. I want every black gangster in New York to understand what happens when they forget their place. Anastasia smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Consider it done. How much time do I have? A week. Maybe less if an opportunity presents itself. But Frank, one thing. Costello leaned forward. This stays between us and the commission. Vito doesn't need to know. He'd use this to make me look weak, to say I've lost control of New York. You understand? I understand, boss. It stays quiet until it's done. After Anastasia left, Costello stood at his penthouse window looking down at the city. 39 floors up, people looked like ants. That's how Frank Costello saw the world. From above. In control. The Prime Minister of the Underworld, they called him. The man who'd modernized the Mafia. Who'd turned street thugs into businessmen. Who'd built relationships with politicians and judges that made the organization nearly untouchable. But Bumpy Johnson was a problem that couldn't be negotiated away. Costello had tried. 3 times in the past 2 years he'd sent emissaries to Harlem with offers. Partnership, fair tribute, access to the Commission's protection and resources. Each time, Bumpy had refused. Harlem stays black, was always his answer. We appreciate the offer, but we operate independently. That independence was an insult. It was a crack in the foundation. If Bumpy could refuse the commission and get away with it, others would follow. The Irish, the Jews, the independent operators who were supposed to know their place. Pretty soon, the whole organization Costello had spent 30 years building would crumble. So Bumpy Johnson had to die. Not because Costello hated him. Actually, Costello respected Bumpy's intelligence and strategic thinking. But respect didn't matter when power was at stake. What Frank Costello didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had known about the death contract for 3 hours already. Saturday, May 3, 1953, 11:15 a.m. 3 hours before Costello signed Bumpy's death warrant. Vincent the Chin Gigante stood in a phone booth on 116th Street in Harlem, feeding nickels into the slot, calling a number he wasn't supposed to have. The phone rang twice. Wells Restaurant. I need to speak to Mr. Johnson. It's urgent. Who's calling? Vincent. He'll know. 30 seconds later, Bumpy's voice came on the line. Talk. Mr. Johnson, I can't stay on long. They'll know I called. But there's a meeting today at the Waldorf. Costello and Anastasia. They're planning something. I heard your name. What kind of planning? The permanent kind, Mr. Johnson. I'm sorry. That's all I can say. The line went dead. Bumpy stood in his office above Wells' restaurant, holding the phone, his face showing no emotion. Illinois Gordon looked up from the desk where he was counting numbers, receipts. Boss? That was Vinny the Chin. Costello's putting out a contract on me. Jesus, when? Soon. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. Anastasia's handling it. Illinois stood up. We need to move you. Get you somewhere safe. Call in our people. We can have 50 guns here in an hour. No. Boss, if Anastasia's coming. I said no. Running makes me look weak. Fighting makes me look dangerous. Either way, I lose. Then what do we do? Bumpy was quiet for a long moment, thinking. We go to them. What? I walk into the Waldorf tomorrow, unarmed, alone, and I talk to Frank Costello before Anastasia can pull the trigger. Illinois stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Boss, that's suicide. You walk into Costello's penthouse unarmed. You're not walking out. Maybe, but it's the only move that changes the game. Costello expects me to run or fight. He doesn't expect me to walk in his front door and ask for a meeting. That surprise, that boldness, that's my only advantage. Why would Costello even see you? Because Frank Costello is a businessman first and a gangster second, and I'm going to offer him something worth more than my death. What could possibly be worth than eliminating a threat? Bumpy smiled, that cold, calculating smile. Information. Leverage. The thing that Frank Costello values more than anything else in the world. Knowledge. Illinois shook his head. You're betting your life on this. I've been betting my life every day for 25 years. This is just another hand of poker, and I'm all in. Sunday, May 4th, 1953, 9 a.m. Bumpy Johnson sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee, thinking through every angle. His wife May watched him from the stove, where she was making breakfast. "You're really going to do this?" she said. It wasn't a question. "I don't have a choice." "You always have a choice. You could run. We could go to Chicago, Detroit, anywhere. And lose everything we've built? Lose Harlem? Lose respect? No, I run now. I never stop running." May brought him eggs and toast, sat down across from him. "Tell me the plan, all of it." "Costello ordered me killed yesterday. Anastasia's coordinating it. They're probably planning to hit me in the next few days, somewhere public enough to send a message, but private enough to avoid witnesses. A restaurant, maybe, or on the street after a meeting. How do you know all this?" "Vinny the Chin called me. He's Costello's bodyguard, but his family is from Harlem. His mother goes to the same church as your sister. He owes us a favor from when I helped his brother avoid a murder charge 3 years ago. So you know they're coming. Why walk into their arms?" "Because that's the last thing they expect. And because I can't win a war with the Commission. They have 500 soldiers. I have maybe 50 good men. If this turns into a shooting war, we lose. Harlem loses. So I have to change the equation. I have to make Costello want me alive more than he wants me dead. How? Bumpy pulled out his black notebook, the same one he'd shown Lucky Luciano 7 years ago, the one containing 25 years of intelligence on every major criminal in New York. This. And one more thing Costello doesn't know I know. What? Vito Genovese is planning a coup. He's going to try to take over the Luciano family from Costello within the next year. He's been building support among the capos, promising them more money, more freedom, less restrictions. Costello doesn't see it coming because Vito's been careful. But I've been watching. I've been collecting evidence. May's eyes widened. And you're going to tell Costello? I'm going to give him the evidence. I'm going to save his throne. And in return, he's going to let me keep mine. What if he doesn't believe you? What if he thinks you're making it up to save your life? Then I'm dead anyway. But I don't think that'll happen. Frank Costello is a lot of things, but he's not stupid. He'll see the evidence, and he'll understand that I'm offering him something more valuable than my corpse. I'm offering him the chance to survive the next gang war. May reached across the table, took his hand. When are you going? This afternoon, 3 o'clock. I called the Waldorf this morning, told the desk clerk to give Mr. Costello a message. Bumpy Johnson requests an audience today, unarmed, alone. Either he agrees or he doesn't. If he agrees, I have a chance. If he doesn't, at least I go down trying. I hate this life sometimes, May said quietly. I know, so do I. But it's the life we have. At 2:30 p.m., Bumpy Johnson got dressed. Black suit, white shirt, silver tie. He looked like he was going to church, not to meet a man who wanted him dead. He left his .45 automatic at home, left his knife, left everything that could be considered a weapon. Illinois drove him to Manhattan in silence. When they pulled up outside the Waldorf Astoria, Illinois finally spoke. "Boss, let me come with you, just to the lobby." "No, this has to be me alone. That's the whole point." "What if you don't come out?" "Then you know what to do. You take over. You protect Harlem. You make sure May and the families are taken care of. You keep the organization running." "Boss." "Illinois, I'm walking in there. That's not changing. Now you can either sit here and wait, or you can go home and I'll call you when it's done. But you're not coming inside." Illinois nodded slowly. "I'll wait." Bumpy got out of the car, stood on the sidewalk looking up at the Waldorf Astoria. 39 floors. Frank Costello at the top. Death waiting in a penthouse suite. Bumpy walked through the revolving doors into the lobby. The Waldorf was the kind of place where movie stars stayed, where presidents held meetings, where the rich and powerful came to see and be seen. A black man in a suit walking through the lobby drew looks, but Bumpy ignored them. He walked straight to the elevator bank, stepped into a car, pressed the button for the 39th floor. The elevator operator, a young white kid in a red uniform, looked nervous. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" "I do." "With who, if I may ask?" "Frank Costello." The kid's face went pale. He'd heard that name before, knew what it meant. "Yes, sir. 39th floor." The elevator climbed. Bumpy watched the numbers light up. 25, 26, 27. Each floor bringing him closer to either salvation or death. He thought about Bobby Washington, his former driver, who'd been killed 3 years ago. Thought about all the men he'd lost over the years to violence and betrayal. Thought about May sitting at home, probably praying. 35, 36, 37. The elevator dinged. 39th floor. The doors opened. Bumpy stepped out into a carpeted hallway. Expensive art on the walls. Suite 39D was at the end. Bumpy walked toward it, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He reached the door, raised his hand, knocked 3 times, waited. The door opened. Vincent the Chin Gigante stood there in a suit, a .38 revolver visible in his shoulder holster. He looked at Bumpy with an expression that mixed respect and fear. "Mr. Johnson, they're expecting you." "Thank you for the warning, Vinny. Your mother's prayers are being answered." "I hope so, sir." Vinny stepped aside. Bumpy walked into Frank Costello's penthouse. The door closed behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Frank Costello's penthouse was everything you'd expect from the Prime Minister of the Underworld. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Mahogany furniture that cost more than most men made in a lifetime. Persian rugs. Crystal decanters full of whiskey that was older than Bumpy. Art on the walls by painters whose names Bumpy recognized from museums. And sitting in a leather wingback chair by the window, Frank Costello himself. He didn't stand when Bumpy entered, didn't offer a handshake, just looked at him with those cold, calculating eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. "Mr. Johnson," Costello said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "You've got balls, I'll give you that. Walking in here unarmed, knowing what I planned for you. You invited me. I didn't think you'd actually come. I thought it was a bluff, a stalling tactic." Bumpy looked around the room. Albert Anastasia stood by the bar, arms crossed, looking like he wanted to break Bumpy in half. Meyer Lansky sat on the couch, his accountant's eyes watching everything, calculating odds. Vincent the Chin was by the door, hand near his weapon. 3 men who could kill Bumpy in seconds if Costello gave the word. "If I'm going to die, Mr. Costello, I prefer to look my killer in the eye. I'm not a man who runs." "Admirable. But that doesn't change the situation. You've become a problem, a very expensive problem. And problems need to be solved." "I agree," Bumpy said. "That's why I'm here, to solve the problem. Just not the way you expected." Costello raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. You've got 5 minutes to convince me why I shouldn't have Albert throw you out that window right now." Bumpy walked to the center of the room, slowly, deliberately, making no sudden movements. He reached into his jacket pocket. Anastasia's hand moved toward his gun. "Easy," Bumpy said. "Just a notebook." He pulled out his black leather notebook, held it up so everyone could see. "This contains 25 years of information, names, dates, operations, weaknesses, every major criminal in New York, including people in this room." "Is that supposed to scare me?" Costello asked. "No, it's supposed to show you that I'm serious, that I've been preparing for this moment for a long time." Bumpy opened the notebook, flipped to a marked page. Meyer Lansky, born Meyer Sucholzensky in Grodno, Poland, 1902. Arrived in America 1911. Partnered with Lucky Luciano in 1920s. handles all financial operations for the Commission, has offshore accounts in Cuba, Switzerland, and the Bahamas, totaling approximately $47 million, has a secret son from a mistress in Miami that his wife doesn't know about. Meyer's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. Costello leaned forward. That's impressive research, but if you think blackmail is going to save you— I'm not blackmailing anyone, Bumpy interrupted. I'm demonstrating capability. I know things that took me decades to learn, things that are worth more than my life, and I'm offering to share them. Why would you do that? Because I'm a businessman, Mr. Costello, just like you, and I understand that sometimes cooperation is more profitable than conflict. You want to kill me because you think I'm a threat to your authority. But what if I could be an asset instead? What if I could give you information that would save your life? The room went very quiet. Costello studied Bumpy's face, looking for deception, for fear, for anything that would tell him this was a desperate bluff. What kind of information? The kind that concerns your throne. The kind that involves someone very close to you who's planning to take everything you've built. Anastasia stepped forward. You trying to turn us against each other? Because if you are— Albert, sit down, Costello said quietly. He hadn't taken his eyes off Bumpy. Let him talk. Bumpy closed his notebook, put it back in his pocket. Vito Genovese is planning a coup. He's going to try to take over the Luciano family from you, probably within the next year. He's been building support among the capos, promising them more money, fewer rules, a return to the old ways. He thinks you've gone soft, that you're too political with the government. He wants to be boss, and he's willing to kill you to get it. The room erupted. Anastasia: That's bullshit. Vito's loyal. Meyer: Do you have proof? Costello: Everyone, shut up. Silence fell. Costello stood slowly, walked to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Johnson. Vito Genovese is my underboss. He's been with the family for 30 years. If you're making this up to save your skin— I have proof, Bumpy said. He reached into his inside jacket pocket. This time, everyone in the room drew their weapons. Bumpy froze, hands visible. Gentlemen, I'm reaching for documents, not a weapon. I came unarmed, like I said. May I? Costello nodded to Vinny. Check him first. Vinny patted Bumpy down, thorough and professional. He's clean, boss. No weapons. Then show me these documents. Bumpy pulled out a folded envelope, handed it to Vinny, who passed it to Costello. Costello opened it, pulled out 3 photographs and a sheet of paper. His face went pale. Where did you get these? I have people everywhere, Mr. Costello, just like you do. The difference is, some of my people are watching your people. The first photograph showed Vito Genovese meeting with 3 capos in a restaurant in the Bronx. The second showed money changing hands. The third showed a piece of paper with names written on it. Capos who were supporting Vito's bid for power. The sheet of paper was a transcript of a conversation, recorded somehow, where Vito explicitly discussed removing Frank when the time is right. Costello read it twice. his hand shaking slightly. Meyer stood, took the papers, read them himself. His face confirmed what Costello feared. It was real. "When was this meeting?" Costello asked quietly. 3 weeks ago, April 12th. The restaurant is Gino's in the Bronx. The 3 capos are Tommy Eboli, Mikel Miranda, and Carmine Lombardosi, all loyal to Vito, all promised better positions when he takes over. How did you record this conversation? The waiter at Gino's is from Harlem. His brother works for me. I've had people watching Vito for 6 months, since I first heard rumors that he was getting ambitious." Anastasia grabbed the papers, read them, his face getting redder with each word. "I'll kill him! I'll kill him today!" "No," Costello said. His voice was ice. "You don't kill an underboss without commission approval. That starts a war. We handle this smart. We gather more evidence. We make sure every family boss sees what Vito's planning. Then we act." He turned to Bumpy. "Why are you giving me this? What do you want?" "I want what I've always wanted. Independence. I want Harlem to stay black. I want to operate without interference. I want to pay fair tribute but not be absorbed into your organization. And I want your protection." That's a lot to ask for some photographs. It's not just photographs. It's my network, my intelligence, my people watching your enemies. Think about what I just did, Mr. Costello. I found out about a coup plot against you that you didn't know existed. I documented it with photos and recordings. I brought it directly to you, walking unarmed into your home, risking my life to warn you. What does that tell you? That you're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the most desperate. "Both," Bumpy said honestly. "I'm desperate because you ordered me killed. I'm brave because I'm betting you're smart enough to see value when it's offered. You can kill me today. Anastasia throws me off this balcony. Everyone in New York knows you don't tolerate disrespect. But then what? You've eliminated one small problem, while a much bigger one is plotting your assassination. Or you can let me live. We make a deal. I become your eyes and ears in Harlem. I feed you intelligence on anyone who threatens your position. And in return, you leave Harlem alone." Meyer spoke for the first time. "Frank, he's making sense. We kill Bumpy, we lose access to his intelligence network. His people won't work with us after we murder their boss. But if we make a deal, if we bring Harlem into the fold as an independent ally rather than a conquered territory, we gain something valuable." "And what's to stop Bumpy from playing both sides?" Anastasia demanded. "What's to stop him from feeding us false information?" "My word," Bumpy said simply. "I give you my word that any intelligence I provide is accurate. And if I ever lie to you, if I ever betray this agreement, then you kill me. No warnings, no second chances. One lie, I'm dead." Costello walked to the window, looked out at Central Park, thinking. The room waited. Bumpy could hear his own heartbeat. Everything depended on the next 60 seconds. Finally, Costello turned around. "Meyer, what's the financial angle?" Bumpy's numbers operation generates approximately $2 million annually. If we absorb it, we get maybe 70% of that after paying overhead. If we make him an ally, he pays us a percentage, say 15%, as tribute. That's $300,000 a year with zero overhead and zero risk. And we get his intelligence network as a bonus. Albert? I don't like it, Anastasia said. We look weak letting him walk in here and negotiate. People will think they can do the same thing. Or, Meyer countered, people will think that Frank Costello is so powerful, so secure, that he can turn enemies into allies without firing a shot. That's real power, not violence, diplomacy. Costello looked at Bumpy. If I agree to this, if I let you live and we make this deal, you work for me, not as a soldier, but as an asset. You report directly to me. You feed me intelligence on everyone, your people, the other families, the independents, everyone. And you pay 15% tribute monthly. Agreed, Bumpy said. But I want 2 things in writing. What things? First, Harlem stays autonomous. Your people don't operate there without my permission. You don't interfere with my businesses. You don't recruit my men. Harlem is mine to run as I see fit. Done. What's the second thing? Protection. If anyone comes after me, anyone tries what you just tried, you back me. You make it clear to the Commission that Bumpy Johnson is under your protection. That an attack on me is an attack on you. Costello thought about it. That's a big ask. That makes you almost untouchable. That's the point. I need to know that this deal is real, that you're not going to shake my hand today and send Anastasia to kill me tomorrow. I need insurance. And what insurance do I get that you'll honor this deal? The same thing I gave you today. Information, loyalty, my word. And if that's not enough, remember that I walked in here unarmed, knowing you wanted me dead. That's not the action of a man who plans to betray you. That's the action of a man willing to bet his life on your intelligence. Meyer leaned over, whispered something in Costello's ear. Costello nodded. All right, Mr. Johnson. We have a deal. 15% tribute. Harlem stays autonomous. You provide intelligence. I provide protection. But understand this. If you ever cross me, if you ever lie to me, if you ever make me regret this decision, I will not kill you quick. I will make you suffer. I will destroy everything you love. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, Mr. Costello. Costello extended his hand. Bumpy shook it. One firm grip, sealing an alliance that would reshape New York's underworld. Vinny, get me a bottle of the good cognac, Costello said. We're celebrating. What are we celebrating? Anastasia asked sourly. The fact that I just avoided a war and gained an asset at the same time. Mr. Johnson, sit down. We have details to discuss, starting with everything you know about Vito Genovese's plans. They sat for 2 hours in that penthouse, Bumpy and the 3 most powerful men in organized crime, drinking $500 cognac and planning the downfall of Vito Genovese. Bumpy laid out everything he knew. The meeting locations, the capos involved, the timeline Vito was working with, the promises he'd made. Costello took notes, asked sharp questions, his strategic mind working through every angle. Meyer calculated the financial implications. Even Anastasia, who'd wanted to throw Bumpy off the balcony an hour ago, grudgingly admitted the intelligence was solid. "Vito's planning to move in September," Bumpy said, "after Labor Day. He thinks that's when your guard will be down, when you'll be relaxed from summer vacation. He's got 12 capos committed, which is enough to swing the vote at a commission meeting. He's also got assurances from the Bonanno family that they'll stay neutral." "Joe Bonanno's with Vito?" Costello's voice was dangerous. "Not with him, just agreed not to oppose him. Vito promised Joe that he wouldn't interfere with Bonanno operations in Brooklyn, a non-aggression pact."
"That son of a bitch," Anastasia growled. "I should have seen this coming." "Nobody sees everything," Meyer said calmly. "That's why intelligence networks matter. That's why Mr. Johnson is valuable." "What do you suggest we do?" Costello asked Bumpy. "You brought me the problem. Do you have a solution?" "I do," Bumpy said, "but you're not going to like it. Try me. You let Vito think he's winning. You don't confront him. You don't arrest his momentum. You let him keep building support, keep making promises, keep digging himself deeper."
"And then?" "Then, 2 weeks before he's ready to move, you spring the trap. You call a commission meeting. You present the evidence. Not just my photos, but new evidence you'll gather over the next 4 months. You show every family boss that Vito was planning a coup without their knowledge, without their approval. You let them see that he was willing to break commission rules to grab power. And then you let them vote." "They'll vote to kill him," Meyer said quietly. "Exactly. And it won't be Frank Costello killing his ambitious underboss. It'll be the commission executing a traitor. Nobody can blame you. Nobody can say you were weak or paranoid. The commission itself will eliminate your problem."
Costello smiled, a real smile, for the first time since Bumpy had arrived.
"That's elegant. That's very elegant."
"It's also patient," Bumpy said. "You have to wait 4 months. You have to watch Vito operate, knowing what he's planning, and not react. Can you do that?" "I've been in this business for 40 years, Mr. Johnson. Patience is how you survive." They talked details for another hour. How to gather evidence without tipping off Vito. Which capos to approach quietly to flip them back. How to coordinate with the other families. Bumpy contributed ideas, suggested people in his network who could help, offered resources.
By the time they finished, it was after 6 p.m. The sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky orange and purple. Costello stood, walked Bumpy to the door. "You know, when Albert told me he was planning to kill you this week, I didn't expect this outcome." "Neither did I," Bumpy admitted. "I walked in here thinking I had maybe a 30% chance of walking out alive." "What made you take those odds?" "Because the alternative was 0%. I could hide, but Anastasia would find me eventually. I could run, but I'd lose everything. This was the only play that gave me a chance."
"You gambled big. That's what you do when you're all in. You bet everything on the strength of your hand." "And what was your hand?" "Information, courage, and the belief that you're smart enough to see value when it's offered, even from an enemy." Costello extended his hand again. "You're not my enemy anymore, Mr. Johnson. You're my ally, and I protect my allies. I'll remember that, Mr. Costello, and I'll earn it." Bumpy walked to the elevator. Vinny the Chin held the door. As Bumpy stepped inside, Costello called out, "Mr. Johnson,
One more thing. Yes. The next time you have information this valuable, don't wait until I've ordered you killed to share it. Come to me directly. That's what allies do. Understood. The elevator descended. 39 floors. Bumpy watched the numbers light up in reverse. 35, 30, 25. Each floor bringing him back to the world of the living. He'd walked into that penthouse expecting to die. He was walking out with an alliance that would change everything.
Illinois was still waiting in the car when Bumpy emerged from the Waldorf. He nearly leaped out when he saw Bumpy walking toward him, alive, unharmed. "Boss, I thought—" "I'm fine," Bumpy said, sliding into the back seat. "Drive. I'll explain on the way." As they drove back to Harlem, Bumpy told Illinois everything. The deal, the intelligence trade, the protection agreement. Illinois listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "Boss, you just allied with the man who wanted you dead 3 hours ago."
I know. That's insane. Maybe. Or maybe it's the smartest thing I've ever done. Costello's not my enemy, Illinois. We both want the same thing: stability, profit, control. We were only enemies because we were competing for the same territory. But now I've shown him that Harlem can be more valuable as an ally than as a conquest. He gets intelligence, tribute, and no war. I get independence and protection. Everybody wins. Except Vito Genovese. Vito made his choice when he decided to betray Costello. I just exposed it. He dug his own grave. I'm just providing the shovel.
They arrived at Wells' restaurant at 7:30. The place was packed with Bumpy's people, all of them waiting anxiously for news. When Bumpy walked in, alive and unharmed, the room erupted in relief. Willie Jackson hugged him. Raymond Quick shook his hand so hard it hurt. People were crying, laughing, unable to believe their boss had survived what should have been a death sentence. "Listen up," Bumpy called out. The room went quiet. "Today I made a deal with Frank Costello. Harlem stays independent. We pay 15% tribute, and in return we get commission protection. Nobody touches us. Nobody interferes with our operations. We're still our own kingdom, but now we have the biggest army in New York backing us up." "What did you give him?" someone asked. "Intelligence, information, the thing we've always been best at collecting. From now on, we're not just watching Harlem, we're watching the entire New York underworld, and we're reporting what we see to Costello. That's how we stay valuable. That's how we stay alive." "Boss, can we trust Costello to honor this deal?" "Yes, because it's in his interest to honor it. I just saved his life by warning him about Vito. He owes me. And more importantly, he sees now that I'm more valuable alive than dead. As long as I keep providing good intelligence, as long as I keep my word, he'll keep his." May was waiting in Bumpy's office upstairs. She stood when he entered, searched his face, then collapsed into his arms. "I prayed all afternoon," she whispered. "Every prayer I know." "They worked," Bumpy said, holding her. "God, the devil, or just dumb luck. Something worked." "What happens now?" "Now we adapt. We've been independent operators for 25 years. Now we're part of something bigger. We're allied with the Commission. That comes with benefits and obligations. We pay tribute, but we get protection. We share information, but we get access to their networks. It's a new game, May, but it's one we can win." Monday, May 5th, 1953.
Word spread through New York's underworld faster than fire. Bumpy Johnson had walked into Frank Costello's penthouse alone and unarmed, and not only survived, but walked out with an alliance. The story grew with each telling. Some versions said Bumpy had blackmailed Costello. Others said he'd offered Costello millions. The truth, that he'd offered information and intelligence, was less dramatic but more dangerous. Because if Bumpy could turn an execution order into an alliance in one afternoon, what else was he capable of? The other families watched carefully. The Gambinos, the Luccheses, the Bonanos, all of them understood that the balance of power had shifted. Harlem wasn't a territory to be conquered anymore. It was an ally to be respected. And Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a local boss anymore. He was a commission asset, untouchable, protected. 4 months later, in September 1953, Frank Costello called a commission meeting. He presented evidence of Vito Genovese's coup plot. Not just Bumpy's original photographs, but 4 months of additional evidence gathered by Costello's people and Bumpy's network. The commission voted unanimously. Vito Genovese was stripped of his rank, exiled from New York, sent to Italy in disgrace.
He would try to come back years later, would eventually succeed in ousting Costello in 1957. But that's another story. For now, in 1953, Bumpy Johnson had proved something that would define the rest of his career. He proved that intelligence was more powerful than violence, that courage could turn enemies into allies, that a man willing to walk unarmed into death's house could change his fate through words and information alone. The alliance between Bumpy and Costello lasted until Costello's retirement. Bumpy fed him intelligence on rivals, on police operations, on anything that threatened commission interests. In return, Costello kept his word. Harlem stayed independent. Bumpy stayed protected.
And nobody, not the Italians, not the Irish, not the independents, ever tried to kill Bumpy Johnson again, because everyone knew that an attack on Bumpy was an attack on Frank Costello, and nobody was stupid enough to make that mistake. Years later, sitting in Wells' restaurant, a young hustler asked Bumpy about that day. "Mr. Johnson, is it true you walked into the Waldorf unarmed? That you met with Costello knowing he'd ordered you killed?" "It's true." "Weren't you scared?" "Terrified," Bumpy admitted. "But fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are high. It doesn't tell you what to do. Logic tells you what to do." "What did logic tell you?" "That I had 3 choices. Run and lose everything. Fight and die in a war one couldn't win, or negotiate and maybe, just maybe, turn an enemy into an ally. The first 2 choices were certain failure. The third choice was uncertain success, so I took it. But you could have died." "Yes, but I could have died any of those 3 ways. At least with negotiation, I had a chance to use my brain instead of my gun. And in this business, kid, your brain is the only weapon that never runs out of bullets." The young hustler thought about that. "Did you really have intelligence on Vito's coup, or did you make it up to save your life?" Bumpy smiled, that cold, knowing smile. "What do you think?" "I think you're too smart to bluff when your life is on the line." "Then you're learning." Bumpy finished his coffee, stood up to leave. "Remember this. Violence is easy. Any fool can pull a trigger. But walking unarmed into your enemy's house and convincing him you're worth more alive than dead, that takes intelligence, courage, and preparation. That's real power. That's how you survive in this business. He walked out of Wells' restaurant into the Harlem night, king of his kingdom, protected by the most powerful crime organization in America, all because he'd been brave enough to bet his life on his brain. That's the story they tell in Harlem. The story of the day Bumpy Johnson walked into Death's house and walked out with an alliance. The day he proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon you can carry is no weapon at all, just your intelligence, your courage, and your word.